A top Chinese artificial intelligence company lost about $2 billion in market value in a single day. That's despite huge amounts of government subsidies. A man who survived Wuhan's virus outbreak is speaking out. He describes a strict lockdown and what the infection took from him. China's richest man hasn't been seen in public for months. One German businessman who spent 7 years in a Chinese prison says he may have an idea of what happened to the tycoon. And the Chinese Communist Party head says his country is against the concept of whosoever has the bigger fist gets the final say. Commentators point out the irony. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The market value of a top Chinese artificial intelligence company dropped by about $2 billion within a single day. Experts believe Chinese investors have less confidence in China's high-tech industry after the U.S. export ban. And this is true even though the companies receive state subsidies. NTD's Chen Han has more.
The shares of Chinese artificial intelligence company iFlyTek plunged 10% on Wednesday. It cost the company a market value of about $1.7 billion in a single day. As for what caused the crash, there were suggestions that the company's revenue from last year fell short of expectations. But the leading AI company responded saying 2020 net income grew by 50% to 70% year on year. But the good performance may be a result of government subsidies. The company brought in a net profit of $40 million in the first half of 2020, though it also obtained around $60 million in government subsidies in the same time frame. The subsidies effectively boosting net profit by 50%. Business professor Frank Xie from University of South Carolina Aiken says it's an example of how the Chinese regime manipulates its economy. He calls it proof that subsidized Chinese companies are unfairly competing with Western firms.
This shows that the CCP is indeed hugely subsidizing enterprises. Without government subsidies, it would probably be very difficult for such state-owned enterprises to survive.
The biggest blow to iFlyTek came in 2019, when it was added to the U.S. trade blacklist. The designation prevents the company from buying U.S.-tied technology, including microchips, a key component in electronics. The decision to blacklist the firm came because of the company's involvement in human rights violations, especially in China's Xinjiang region. iFlyTek was accused of selling technology to the Chinese regime that's used to oppress the Uyghur ethnic minority there. The AI company also works with China's Ministry of Public Security, helping to establish a database used to monitor the public. Professor Xie says China's tech companies are now struggling to survive amid the U.S. crackdown on intellectual property theft. Reporting by Chen Han, NTD News.
Chinese companies are buying more equipment from other countries in order to produce computer chips. This is thought to be a countermeasure against the U.S. ban. A Bloomberg analysis shows that China imported almost $32 billion worth of chip-producing equipment from Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and other countries last year. This is a 20% jump compared to 2019. Due to the U.S. ban on advanced technology, Chinese firms cannot buy high-end chips for computers, mobile phones, cars, and many other devices. This is why the Chinese regime decided to produce high-end chips without U.S. technology. But so far, no Chinese company has been successful. A team from the World Health Organization is searching for clues in Wuhan, China, about the origins of the CCP virus. Zoologist and WHO team member Peter Daszak dismissed the theory that the virus leaked from Wuhan's virology lab, saying there's no evidence to support the claim. He explained work still needs to be done to trace the virus's genetic elements in bat caves. The team of experts visited the lab in question on Wednesday, spending around 3 hours there. Daszak is a colleague and friend of Shizhen Li, director for the Center for Emerging Infectious Diseases at the Wuhan lab. She's known for her work studying coronaviruses native to bats. Daszak had previously defended her against the lab leak allegations. According to a Wall Street Journal column, Daszak's nonprofit organization has distributed more than $100 million in U.S. federal grants to fund overseas lab experiments, including those at the Wuhan lab. The WHO's team of investigators have so far visited hospitals, research facilities, and the seafood market, where the country's first outbreak was identified. The trip comes 1 year after the virus was first detected in the Chinese city and was arranged by the Chinese Communist regime. Its purpose is to inspect the work done by their Chinese colleagues, but the experts won't be conducting their own research there, nor will they be allowed to speak with locals or family members of virus victims. A Wuhan resident recounts what it's like to be put under virus lockdown in China. He was living in the epicenter of the CCP virus when the pandemic struck. NTD's Yang Yang has more.
One Wuhan resident tells his story about what it was like living through the start of the pandemic from inside the virus epicenter. Liu Jiaxin's home was just a 10-minute walk from the Huanan seafood market, a place many suspect the virus originated from. But back in late 2019, when the infection first struck China, Liu had no idea how serious things would get.
Chinese media were saying that the virus wouldn't spread between humans, so I let my guard down. After I went to crowded places multiple times, I started to have symptoms. I spit out blood while coughing and had a fever. I was really nervous.
Chinese authorities didn't admit human-to-human transmission was possible until January 20th last year. Liu sought medical treatment after his symptoms appeared, but it didn't go well.
The hospital said I had to get permission from the community center first in order to get treatment. But after I went to the community center, they asked me to provide a diagnosis from the hospital first. Eventually, I recovered from the virus by taking medication at home, but my sense of smell and taste are lost forever.
But a lack of medical treatment wasn't the only issue. 3 days after authorities announced human-to-human transmission was possible, Wuhan and its 11 million residents were put under strict lockdown, which went into effect in the middle of the night. Residents were blocked from leaving Wuhan. In some neighborhoods, people were even barred from leaving their homes. Liu explained that during lockdown, the only food he had access to was ramen instant noodles. He blames the Chinese regime's handling of the situation.
I know many Wuhan residents were infected with the virus, but hospitals refused to treat them. They also couldn't leave their homes and were left to die on their own.
Liu also says he doesn't trust China's official figures. He explained back when the official death toll was around 3,000, a friend working in a local funeral home told him that at the peak, daily deaths surpassed 5,000. Wuhan eased its lockdown in April last year. Liu took the opportunity and fled China and is now living in Los Angeles. Yang Yang, NTD News.
An update from China's northeast. There, a woman has been accused of bringing the virus to the region and starting an outbreak. She lives in Shenyang province. Authorities say the woman died at the end of January. In the 4 days following her death, local officials didn't report any new virus-related deaths. But officials released new information on Thursday. They say she had recovered from the virus and later died from inflammation in her abdomen. They didn't mention whether or not the condition was caused by the virus infection. More than 10 neighborhoods in Beijing, with a combined population of roughly 30,000, have been put under strict lockdown for more than 2 weeks. Nobody knows when they will reopen. This as residents are getting more and more discontent with authorities. In the middle of January, one of the neighborhoods detected cases of the CCP virus. Officials upgraded the neighborhood's risk level to high. Some 10 neighborhoods nearby have also been shut down. Now, after more than 2 weeks, residents are complaining on Chinese social media, saying it's been a long time and they couldn't go to work. But officials did not seem to show much sympathy. One of the residents wrote on January 18th, they just shut the neighborhood down with a verbal notice. There are not even any official documents. It's been 16 days now, and we have undergone 4 rounds of virus tests. Nobody knows when this will come to an end. Another one wrote, every day we are either fighting over water or fighting over food. It is difficult to buy water and food is too expensive. We have mortgages and car loans to pay. But how can we get the money when we can't go to work? China's most famous entrepreneur, Jack Ma, has been left off a state media list of business leaders. The snub shows just how much he's fallen out with Beijing. NTD's Patrick Hayden has the details.
Jack Ma faces a new snub in China. The Alibaba founder has been left out of a state media list of entrepreneurial leaders. China's best-known businessman wasn't even mentioned in the front-page article published by the Shanghai Securities News. The piece celebrated people who, it said, abided by market rules. Mentioned were names like Huawei's Ren Zhengfei, Xiaomi's Lei Jun, and BYD's Wang Chuanfu. The story was published the same day Alibaba released its quarterly earnings. It didn't respond to a request for comment. The snub also comes as Ma's fintech company Ant Group reached a restructuring deal with the Chinese regulators. Bloomberg reports the business will be turned into a financial holding company. This could be a major step forward, easing his regulation woes. Bloomberg says, according to people close to the matter, the plan calls for putting all of Ant's businesses into the financial holding company. That includes its technology offerings in areas like blockchain and food delivery. Bloomberg reports that Ant is still exploring opportunities to revive its stock market listing. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
It's still not clear what happened to China's richest man, Jack Ma. NTD speaks with a German businessman who spent over 7 years in a Chinese prison. He has an idea. NTD's Christian Watson reports.
This week, a state-controlled Chinese newspaper celebrating China's tech entrepreneurs left out its most famous one. Jack Ma, founder of e-commerce giant Alibaba. Observers see it as a sign that Beijing is still at odds with China's richest man. Ma disappeared for 3 months after a speech criticizing China's regulators last year. Robert Rother has an idea of what happened to Ma. In 2011, as Rother was running a successful financial website in China, he was suddenly arrested and jailed.
After that, I spent the next 7 years, 7 months in pre-trial detention and in Chinese prison. And 18 months of that was just in detention without any indictment at all. The indictment came 18 months later. For that long, I had to hold out in more or less solitary confinement. And so from that, I know the game of what it's like to have lies put in front of you by the Chinese government.
Rother's conviction relied exclusively on testimonies from police interrogation. He says some of them were simply made up. Rother says in areas like finance or technology, the Chinese Communist Party works hard to maintain its control. Businessmen who become too independent and not willing to compromise or share certain information with the authorities face their ire.
When I was in prison, I met several businessmen who also had businesses that were very successful, and also just in niche areas where they might have developed a little monopoly position because of certain intelligence, and such people are wiped out. And then there are always allegations of corruption or contract fraud.
Last month, Ma appeared in a 50-second video message, with no mention of what happened to him. Rother believes Ma was on the regime's watch list for a while.
An arrest like that doesn't usually happen overnight. They plan it very well, and then they gather their evidence, in quotes, and at some point, when the time comes, then you get nicked, and then you're gone. And something like that happened with Jack Ma too.
Christian Watson, NTD News, Berlin.
Chinese Communist Party Chairman Xi Jinping says China opposes bullying the weak. But commentators are pointing out the irony and the CCP's aggressive history. NTD's Don Ma has more.
Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping says China opposes bullying of the weak, adding that China is against the idea of whosoever has the bigger fist gets the final say. The comments came during a speech on Monday. Minzi Chen, the president of a nonprofit organization for supporting Taiwanese independence, called the speech the most infuriating irony ever, noting that, quote, China is the biggest bully in the world. Taiwan maintains that it's been targeted and suppressed by China for years. China has worked to keep Taiwan out of international bodies, like the World Health Organization, for decades. Beijing claims the island is a Chinese province and part of mainland China, thus is represented in the WHO by China. But despite the claim, the island has its own democratic government, military, currency, and constitution. Just 2 days after Xi Jinping's anti-bullying speech, China sent military aircrafts into Taiwan's airspace in an apparent act of military aggression. The Chinese regime has repeatedly threatened military force to bring Taiwan under its control. US-based economist Gobi Dong says Beijing also bullies its own people.
The Chinese Communist Party enslaves 1.4 billion people in China by bullying them. It relies on its military force and tyranny. When the Chinese Communist Party used extreme tyrannical violence against the protesters in Hong Kong, it was also an act of bullying the weak.
During Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests last year, Chinese authorities fired pepper spray, tear gas, and water cannons into unarmed crowds and made close to 400 arrests. The U.S. Economist says China also uses bullying tactics on the international stage.
In international trade, the Communist Party has a record of using trade sanctions as a stick to silence any international voice that questions China on human rights. This kind of bullying has been seen in trade disputes with Australia.
Last year, China slapped a number of trade sanctions and tariffs on Australian exports. One tariff reached as high as 200%. The sanctions came after Australia called for an independent investigation into the origins of the pandemic in China. Xi Jinping's speech was delivered virtually during an event hosted by the World Economic Forum, known as the WEF. It's a non-government organization dedicated to improving global political affairs. The organization posted a video of Xi Jinping's speech on its Twitter account, which has drawn mainly negative feedback from netizens. Don Ma, NTD News.
House Republicans want to delay confirmation of President Biden's commerce pick until Xi commits to keeping Huawei on the trade blacklist. Here are the details.
Nearly 24 House Republicans say Huawei poses a national security threat, and they're concerned that President Biden's commerce pick, Gina Raimondo, will take Huawei off the trade blacklist. Although Raimondo vowed to protect U.S. telecom networks last week during her confirmation hearing, she wouldn't commit to keeping Huawei on the blacklist. Now the House Republicans want the Senate to halt her confirmation. Republican Steve Womack tweeted, "Huawei is inextricably tied to the CCP and poses a national security threat. It's beyond concerning that Governor Raimondo and the administration have failed to commit to keeping the company on the Commerce's entity list. Her confirmation should be halted until we have a concrete stance." Republican John Joyce writes, "The Senate should hold on Governor Raimondo's confirmation until the Biden administration clarifies its intentions for Huawei and the Chinese Communist Party. They say the Department of Commerce has authority over export controls, and leaders there need to understand the CCP and how it uses technology for surveillance. By law, Chinese companies have to cooperate with Chinese intelligence agencies if asked. Huawei denies the allegations. Former President Trump put Huawei on a trade blacklist in 2019, and he tried to convince U.S. allies to exclude it from their 5G networks. The Republicans say this is a bipartisan issue, and they're calling on members on both sides of the aisle to support their effort.
UK media regulator Ofcom is revoking broadcast permission for a Chinese state-owned television channel. Without its license, the station won't be able to legally air content. Following an investigation, Ofcom concluded that China Global Television Network, known as CGTN, is ultimately controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. That means it's disqualified from holding a broadcast license under UK law. The regulator previously ruled that CGTN repeatedly breached impartiality standards with its coverage of Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests, and noted that CGTN could face sanctions due to the seriousness of the breaches. The Chinese station broadcasts in English through satellite and targets audiences outside China. It's headquartered in Beijing and owned by China Central Television, the biggest state-owned broadcaster in the country. It's widely considered a mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party. The U.S. State Department last year designated CGTN and other Chinese state-owned media outlets as foreign missions. The status requires the company to register staff names and personal details with American authorities, as well as report whether they own or lease property in the U.S. A Chinese researcher was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison earlier this week for conspiring to steal U.S. trade secrets for the Chinese regime. Li Chen worked at the Ohio-based research institution at the Nationwide Children's Hospital for 10 years. Her husband worked at a different medical research lab at the same hospital. In 2015, they founded a biotech company in China selling exosome isolation kits based on trade secrets stolen from the hospital. Exosomes play an important role in communication among cells. They are key in treating liver diseases. According to the indictment, the couple received funding from various Chinese regime entities without telling the hospital. Chen also applied to multiple talents programs in China. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the CCP uses these programs to transfer foreign research and technology. As part of her sentence, Chen was also ordered to pay $2.6 million in restitution. Her stocks with a value of over $1 million will also be confiscated. Her husband now awaits sentencing. Video sharing platform TikTok is preparing to leave India. The Asian country was once its largest market, home to more than 200 million users. The social media app is owned by Chinese developer ByteDance. In late January, the company told its 2,000-plus workforce in India that the firm would soon shut down operations there. That's amid uncertain business prospects, following a countrywide ban on the app. The information comes from India-based magazine Business Today, citing an internal company memo. India recently issued a permanent ban on nearly 60 Chinese mobile apps, including TikTok. The move comes as border tensions spark between the two countries. This came after its border tensions with China were on the rise. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow. Hi, we're happy to announce that you can also catch us on cable TV now. Millions of households already choose us as one of their trusted news sources, and you can too. You can watch us in Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York, and many other cities as well. And if your system doesn't carry NTD yet, you can just give them a quick call and request NTD on your cable provider. Thank you for watching. See you next time.